debate. And we're looking at the situation in Mali and asking how you get the state back up and running after the French intervention there. We're talking about it with Gao native Abdoulay MAIGA, who is with us in the studio. Thanks for being with us. Also with us, American journalist and filmmaker Michael KIRTLEY. We won't ask you when your first trip to Mali dates back to.
Well, when I was 20 years old.
Okay,
how about that?
There you go. Day before yesterday. Also with us, Franco-Congolese blogger Jean-Hugues KABUIKU. Thank you for being back with us. And Luke Brown, we mentioned in part one, you're just back from Gao. We're going to take a look now, as promised at the outset, at that segment of the story that you filed for Reporters, the France 24 investigative news magazine. Now, we're going to pick up where you're on the outskirts of the northern city of Gao.
Just outside the town, a second Islamist militia was based at this camp. The fighters of the Mujao considered Gao their stronghold. Now the zone is under the control of soldiers from Niger, part of the multinational African force in Mali. Devastated buildings, all that remains after the French aerial bombardment forced the Mujao into a hasty retreat. And in the middle of the ruins, abandoned equipment and documents, lists of local recruits, mission reports, even passwords for their checkpoints. 100 Mujao fighters trained here, heavily armed with weapons imported from Libya. The jihadists may have fled, but their threat is still tangible. This local refusing to talk, scared of retribution.
I'm scared because less than a week ago they killed a chief because of an interview. They came, they saw him on TV, they went to his home, they kidnapped him, and they killed him. 3 days ago. He died just 3 days ago.
Fear of the Islamists, then, is still palpable. Gao may be under control, but it's a different story in the surrounding countryside. French forces only venture out in large numbers and in heavily armoured vehicles. This patrol includes 100 soldiers and 15 troop carriers. A breakdown leaves the entire convoy vulnerable in still hostile territory.
With the trees, we can't see very much. Given that we can't see 360 degrees, they can come from anywhere.
This is no man's land, ideal for the jihadists' guerrilla tactics. For the French forces, any civilian could be a potential enemy sympathizer.
Can we get some feedback from the vehicles at the head of the convoy? Check, Lieutenant.
40 kilometers from Gao, the welcome in the village of Amakulaji is reassuring. The objective for the French forces, root out any Islamists and reassure the villagers.
Since we came here, they haven't come back? You never saw them again?
Up until now, we haven't seen them. But once you go, who's to say they won't come back? Or that they're not hidden somewhere? No one. We're very shaken up. They left us traumatized.
Back in Gao, the Malian forces don't have the same resources as their French allies.
With binoculars, it would be better.
Colonel Major Didier Dacko is the commander of regional operations.
What weapons do you have here?
Today, the colonel is inspecting a sentry post on the banks of the Niger River.
Is there another observation post on this side you're in contact with?
Yes, but...
So how do you establish contact with them?
Well, we don't have a radio.
Oh, I see.
With no radios, no binoculars, no bulletproof vests, the Malian army lacks equipment and it isn't ready for a French withdrawal. Its reputation was already damaged by last year's retreat. After helping liberate Gao, the military is only just regaining credibility with the local population.
Merci beaucoup. Merci. Not too many people on the side of the road there, Luke Brown. By the way, you can see that report in full on our website or in Reporters, the France 24 investigative news magazine at 9:45 p.m. Paris time. Luke, you talk about the Malian army regaining credibility. Guests we've had on this show say basically in a lot of places in the north, the Malians don't mind seeing the French, but they don't want to see their own army back.
Well, I think if you go to Kidal, for example, the MNLA Tuareg rebels, what's their stronghold, is also they're still basically in control, along with the French army and the Chadian army in Kidal. There's no way at the moment that the Malian army could go there. They would be greeted with bullets, basically. So that means, to what extent is the Malian military unable to go north in its own country is somewhat surprising. Do they deserve that reputation? Well, what happened last year, the coup d'etat, the various things that they failed to do in defending their country from the advance of the Islamists and the MNLA last year, perhaps that does justify some of the criticism. When you look at the contrast between the French forces, also the soldiers from Niger, they have bulletproof vests, they have modern, if you will, helmets, whereas, as you saw in that video clip there, the Malian army really are poorly equipped. Their helmets, they're from 30 or 40 years ago.
And at the beginning of the segment, the man talks about somebody else who spoke on camera and then they took him away. Who's they?
Well, that could be... it's not necessarily the Mujahid, it's certainly the Islamists, but they brutalized this man. He was a 60-year-old Arab chief who, not necessarily then the enemy of the Mujahid, but he spoke out to the Malian TV about a week before we were there, and then he was simply abducted from his home by Islamists. We don't know who necessarily. They came in from the bush into the town. They took him out into the...
And that's according to who?
That's according to his body was found and he was hospitalized.
But that he'd been taken away by
I can't say for sure that it was the Mujahid. He was denounced for. He was abducted because he had revealed what had gone on during under the Islamists. So
there are revenge killings going on. Michael Kirtley, the revenge killings aren't coming from just one side.
Well, today, unfortunately, I actually have an example of that. As you've reported here already on France 24, you have had abductions that have taken place on the part of the Malian army against the local populations, notably the Tuareg and the Arab populations in Timbuktu and to the south near Gao. And the concern is very strong, and this began quite a while ago after the MNLA and the Islamists were able to defeat the Malian army in the north, when there was a lot of talk of revenge on the part of the Malian army, and even in other sectors in Bamako. As a matter of fact, there have been death lists that have been put together in Bamako. Well, over the past couple of months, as the Malian army has advanced into this area, there have been several reports of abductions and killings of the local population. And today, at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I received a call from a town called Usaga near the about 150 kilometers south of, it's not a town actually, it's more of a camp to the south of Gao, from a family that I know personally. And the story was, it was by the women. The women were there abandoned because the men of that town had just been kidnapped, just been abducted by vehicles belonging to the Malian army. They were dressed up in the Malian army. The people were, the soldiers, whether they were militia or whether they were regular soldiers, I wasn't able to determine.
How many men abducted?
They said something like 30 vehicles. were there.
And how many people were abducted?
In such a situation, I think it's important to put a name to people. One of the sort of the head of the clan there is named Geish Mubarak, and he was 70 years old, and he was taken away with three of his younger brothers. And they were taken into the desert. And this has happened multiple times over the past several weeks.
And why would he be taken away?
Well, it's a good question. From what his family was telling me, they were getting ready to leave and go to a refugee camp in northern Burkina Faso. What's very interesting, though, is that
and he's Tuareg.
He's Tuareg, yes, he's Tuareg. And then what had happened is that the people had come and taken these men, taken them into the desert, wherever, but they had found the keys of his vehicle and then come back for his vehicle in the same village. So this was a very coordinated attack, on these particular people. But I don't think that it's unusual. I think this is happening all over the southern Mali right now.
Abdoulay, MAIGA, what's your reaction?
Well, I wouldn't know if it's an organized act from the Malian army, but I think it's more like sectors of the army who are probably seeking revenge, and without any proof, they're probably... I think the conflict is basically due because, as you said, he's Tuareg, and they have a lack of confidence towards the Tuareg, and there's this conflict going on in the north between the non-Tuaregs and the Tuaregs. And I think that certain people in the army have this sense of vengeance and are trying to take individual revenge on the Tuareg population, which once again, I do not think is the way to proceed, because the Tuaregs, as much as the non-Tuaregs, are Malian nationals, and they have been there as long as the non-Tuaregs. They have the right to be there, and it's not right to kidnap innocent people, because it's not just because you're a Tuareg that you're forcefully with the Islamist movement. And so I think that these acts should be condemned, and this is not the way that we want the country to be seen.
And my question is, why aren't the French condemning these attacks? Because this isn't the first example. You've reported already on France 24. Why isn't the president of Mali, Jaconda Traoré, why isn't he condemning this more strenuously? In other words, if you're not going to condemn the Malian army or the Malian militia for doing these sorts of things, that sort of gives them a license to be able to do it.
But once again, I think it's due to this lack of information, lack of communication, lack of organization. And I think that Jonguna is not forcefully, well, he probably has heard and he's aware, but he probably doesn't know exactly which people are acting. And as you said, they came, we think it's the Malian army, well, they were dressed as the Malian army. They took them into the desert. All right, and they took them into the desert somewhere. And I think it's very hard to coordinate all these movements, but I think that, yes, Jonguna should be condemning such acts.
Both the French president and the defense minister have warned the Malian army against committing revenge killings or atrocities, but they haven't gone into specific cases. The report, I want to get your reaction to what we saw, that excerpt of the report, and seeing those images of your native city.
I think it's very touching, but it's very interesting to see, because I think that there's a state of fear, and although the people are living in security right now, they are very scared for the future, and they are looking into this future, and the lack of confidence in the Malian army, the lack of organization, truthfully, after what has happened, the population does not trust the army and fears that if once again there should be any problems, or if the Islamists should come back, they fear that the army might retreat and go south, as they did last time. And so this fear makes it very, very hard to live daily in Gao, and I think many people are trying to find solutions to get out of Gao, even though essentially it seems very secure right now, but I think that they fear that once the French army has left, it will be impossible to live, and that the Islamists will be coming back.
All right, Abdoulay, I don't know if you've heard, but there's an economic crisis going on here in France, and there's not going to be a French soldier behind every tree in Gao. So what can you do to make Gao safe without deploying loads of troops or keeping loads of troops there?
Concretely, I think that we need to try as much as we can to organize the Malian army and to be able to communicate with the other African forces that are supposed to stay in place after the French army has left. Because after the French have left, it's supposed to be the United African Nation that are supposed to take over and supposed to have their troops securing the territory before the Malians can do it for themselves. And so I think what we should be thinking about now before retreating is how do we organize this follow-up, and how the French can, little by little, led the power to the Malian army, to the other African nations, in order to see how they're going to organize, how they're going to assure the security, and see how well they evolve. But then, as you said, the French do have a crisis and do have a limited amount of time that they can spend, because I think it's a very expensive war and they can't stay there forever.
I think that a lot of this is the responsibility of the Malians themselves, because what the problem in the Malian press today is it's almost all about the war. What about the people of Mali? What about the importance and the goodness and the culture and the history of Mali? Why? It seems to me to rebuild a country, you have to rebuild it on a sort of nationalistic pride that includes all of the different components of the nation. Today, it seems to me that press in Mali, and even the press outside Mali, is contributing greatly to an attitude that this is an impossible situation. And we're doing that ourselves, of course. But the Malians, it's up to them to start rebuilding, not only in terms of negotiating or having dialogue, but rebuilding the idea that it's not just territorial integrity, it's a national identity. There's no national identity in Mali right now.
Which is incredible when you see that Mali was sort of the poster child for 2 decades for good governance.
Well, it was a poster child on the outside world. As I've said, even here on France 24, the Malian democracy went about 100 kilometers beyond the borders of Bamako. There was a Malian administration, there was a Malian army, but it's hard to describe that as a functioning country, except for the fact the United States and France were saying it was.
There is a certain extent, many people in Bamako and across the country are fed up of the corrupt government. They would, even before, under the previous administration, ATT, under the current interim government, many people not that willing to vote. People I spoke to in Bamako itself, in the capital, they said
they've given up on
they're
politics.
not necessarily wanting to vote, even if those elections do take place.
All right, a lot more to see, by the way, in Luc Brown's report, which will be in Reporters, the France 24 investigative news magazine. Thank you for being with us. I want to thank Abdoulay, MAIGA. I want to thank Michael KIRTLEY and Jean-Hugues KABUIKU for being with us. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.